The US and Canada unite in the South China Sea. Washington is posed to ban Russian and Chinese software and hardware in vehicles. And will China sell TikTok to Elon Musk? That and more on this week's China News Headlines. Welcome to China Uncensored. I'm Chris Chappell. This episode is sponsored by Surfshark. Whenever you go online, you really ought to be using a VPN like Surfshark to cover your tracks and protect your identity. I'll tell you more in a bit. And before we get into what's happening in China, I want to start with what's happening with Operation Honeypot. We needed your help to combat YouTube censorship, and you stepped up. 30,000 of you. If you don't know what I'm referring to, that's probably because YouTube shadow banned the episode we did about it, so I'll leave a link to it below. And if you want to be part of this fight against censorship, write a YouTube comment below this video and use the honeypot emoji. If you've left one under a previous video, thank you. Please leave a comment on this video too. And now, on with the show. The U.S. Department of Commerce is set to ban Russian and Chinese software and hardware in vehicles due to, wait for it, national security concerns, which probably should have happened a lot sooner, considering Russia and China may have heard this news long before anyone else from people talking about it in a car with their software and hardware. The rule was posted in the Federal Register by the Bureau of Industry and Security, which found during the rulemaking process that passenger cars with Russian and Chinese technology, especially cars with external connectivity or autonomous driving capabilities, present an undue and unacceptable risk to the U.S. You think? The thing is, pretty much all cars these days have external connectivity. In fact, if phones are linked to the cars, that makes hacking all the easier. Just think about the recent telecom hacks the CCP launched. By using their software, it's like leaving your house and shouting as loud as you can, "I sure hope no one steals my stuff while I'm gone," and leave everything unlocked. According to a Commerce Department press release, malicious access to these critical supply chains could allow our foreign adversaries to extract sensitive data, including personal information about vehicle drivers or owners, and remotely manipulate vehicles. According to an anonymous senior administration official, the auto industry has largely agreed with the outcome and recommendations for the ban. Software bans will apply to Model 2027 cars, while the hardware bans will apply to Model 2030 cars, with the department adding it'll issue a separate rule for commercial vehicles sometime in the near future. So, for now, maybe don't share any secrets while in one of these cars. On the bright side, it'll give you an excuse for not wanting to have a conversation with your Uber driver. The Philippines is alarmed after China sent a so-called monster ship to a disputed shoal. Monstrous in size, not as in being a werewolf or how the CCP treats fellow human beings. China has been escalating tensions with the Philippines for a while now, with frequent attacks on Filipino ships. This time, they sent their biggest Coast Guard vessel, the 165-meter-long CCG 5901, to the Scarborough Shoal, which China calls Huangyang Dao, and claims as its own as part of its illegal 9-dash line grab of the entire South China Sea. And as I said, this has been dubbed a monster ship, which sounds like the name of a pretty sweet sci-fi original movie. The Philippines accused the Chinese Communist Party of trying to intimidate Filipino fishermen in the waters nearby, and of trying to normalize an illegal presence in Filipino waters. Jonathan Malaya, a spokesperson with the Philippines National Security Council, called on the CCP to remove the ship and described its presence as an escalation and provocative, as well as being illegal and unacceptable. Oh, well, if the country that China's been illegally and unacceptably harassing for months calls its actions illegal and unacceptable, I'm sure China will be like, "Our bad." Or China's embassy in Manila will say this was in Chinese territory and therefore it is fully justified. The Philippines says it has sent two of its own biggest ships to drive away the Chinese one, and sure, their ships aren't as large. But as I've heard some guys aggressively assert, it's not the size of the boat, it's the motion of the ocean. According to Bloomberg, China is weighing the sale of TikTok to Elon Musk as a possible option. This is just one of the CCP's contingency plans should the U.S. Supreme Court decide to uphold a law calling for TikTok to be banned in the U.S. unless it's sold by its parent company ByteDance by January 19th. If that deadline passes with no resolution, third-party internet service providers would be penalized for supporting the app's operations in America. It isn't clear if ByteDance, which has ties to the CCP, is aware of any of these contingency plans, which means that the company might not have any say over what ends up happening to TikTok. And people wonder why TikTok is seen as a national security threat. A TikTok spokesperson said, "We can't be expected to comment on pure fiction." Musk also hasn't commented, and it's unclear if he's involved or even knows what the CCP is considering. But he's not the only option. Popular YouTuber Mr. Beast has offered to buy TikTok in order to stop it from being banned. Of course, ahead of the TikTok ban, the even worse Chinese app Red Note has surged to be the #1 most downloaded app in America, and my faith in humanity takes another hit. Check out the episode I did yesterday about that. The US and Canada are joining forces by conducting joint drills in the South China Sea. Maybe Trump was onto something with his proposal of making Canada the 51st state. The drill involves 2 ships, one Canadian and one American, which together navigated through the South China Sea to conduct communications exercises, flight operations, and anti-submarine warfare training. These exercises were in international waters, but not far from territory China disputes with the Philippines, and were meant to show a shared commitment to a free and open Indo-Pacific. An apparently much-needed display, since according to Canada's CTV News, the Canadian warship was closely followed by a number of Chinese naval vessels. Maybe that unity plan Trump had for the 2 countries would be helpful after all. It'd be easier for the US to add 1 star to their flag than all the countries in the region changing theirs to this one. And after the break, Joe Biden gives a very special farewell message to China. Welcome back. China is reportedly building a new fleet of D-Day-style barges suitable for landings on Taiwan. China's Communist Party has been threatening Taiwan for years with military drills, attack video simulations, and cyber warfare. In fact, some analysts think Chinese military drills near the island will increase. But this is something else entirely. Last Friday, the Naval News website cited many unnamed sources in a report that said at least 3, but likely 5 or more of these barges were seen in China's Guangzhou shipyard. They contain 390-foot-long road bridges, which can extend from the front of a naval vessel. According to the report, in operation, the barges would act as a pier to allow the unloading of trucks and tanks from cargo ships. Because why focus on improving your failing economy, infrastructure, or containing another virus when you can put all your effort into taking back a country that was never yours? Of course, Beijing hasn't commented on this story one way or another, but it continues to claim Taiwan as part of its territory and maintains that so-called unification is inevitable. Now, technically, these barges could be for civilian use, but the fact that so many are being built at once and that they are much larger than the typical ones used in civilian shipping makes this about as likely as COVID starting in a wet market. The terrain of Taiwan means there aren't many beaches China can use for an invasion, and the few that exist are likely to be heavily guarded. So these barges could allow the Chinese military to get around some of those hurdles, meaning they're potentially a game changer. Taiwan is trying to show that it is preparing for the worst-case scenario by holding its annual Lunar New Year military drills. Plus, much to the CCP's chagrin, the island continues to receive U.S. military aid. Mike Waltz, the soon-to-be national security advisor for President Trump, even stated that he seeks to increase and speed up the delivery of weapons to Taiwan in order to counter China. So it still might not be as easy for the CCP to barge right in as it thinks. President Joe Biden is making a few very important farewells in his last few days in office, not least to the Chinese Communist Party. His administration is adding 37 Chinese companies to a forced labor list. Most of these companies are from the Chinese textile, mining, and solar sectors. And the list they're being added to refers to forced labor practices in Xinjiang, where absolutely nothing bad is happening to the Uyghurs. No, sir, nothing to see here. Rights groups have long pressured the West to pull away from factories that make products in Xinjiang, since they're known to widely use forced labor, mainly from the Uyghurs, who are undergoing a genocide in the region, despite the denials of the CCP. These companies are the biggest single expansion of the Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act list since the law was passed 4 years ago. It brings the total number of banned companies to 144. One company newly on the list, Zijin Mining Group, saw shares fall by as much as 3.4% in early trading in Hong Kong. The other companies seem stable so far stock-wise, but some major Chinese solar companies are trying to limit the risk of being added to the list by switching to more expensive polysilicon materials from Western countries. So now our enemies are funding us, losing out on profit, and slowing down unethical labor practices. Now that's what I call a win. Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesman called the law evil at a Wednesday press conference in Beijing, saying it amounts to interference in the country's internal affairs. China has denied using any slave labor practices or oppressing the Uyghurs in any way, and promises to safeguard its enterprises and their rights. Their right, I assume, to oppress the Uyghurs. But the Biden administration isn't done there, because the Pentagon is also adding several Chinese companies to its own blacklist. On Tuesday, the U.S. Department of Defense released its annual list of Chinese military companies determined to be operating directly or indirectly in the United States. The blacklist prevents these companies from working with the DoD, and although it doesn't officially place sanctions on the companies, it does dissuade many from working with them. I wish that the CCP, being the way it is, would be enough to dissuade anyone from working with them, but I guess a blacklist will have to do. On the list is contemporary Amperex technology, which was involved in Ford's Marshall EV battery plant. It also happens to be the world's biggest producer of batteries for electric vehicles and even supplies Elon Musk's Tesla. So Musk buying TikTok wouldn't be the first time the world's richest man bought a shady product from an even shadier supplier. The blacklist has been expanded to include Chinese tech giants, which could speed up a decoupling of the U.S. economy from China. One of these tech giants is Tencent, the parent company of the Chinese messaging app WeChat and behind a bunch of the video games you love. Tencent called the listing a mistake and has claimed that its business would be unaffected. But its Hong Kong-listed shares fell by 7.3% on Tuesday, which means a loss of about $35.4 billion in market value. Yes, unaffected. Biden is also arguing that thanks to him, the Chinese economy will never surpass the U.S.
You all recall, many experts believe or predicting it was inevitable that China's economy would surpass ours. According to many predictions, that would happen by the year 2030 or shortly thereafter. But we in this room said no. If we make the investments in ourselves, we protect our workers and technologies, that will not happen. Now, according to the latest predictions, on China's current course, they will never surpass us.
He also added that Washington had responsibly managed its complex ties with Beijing and that the relationship never tipped over into conflict in his 4 years as president, which I personally wouldn't brag about because, as we know, all those talks Washington held with the CCP were super effective. China may have bullied various countries, spied on the U.S. and Canada, and flouted Western sanctions on Iran and Russia, but it and the U.S. didn't actually go to war. What a success. No doubt Biden wants to leave a legacy for himself of being tough on China, and in some ways he has. Biden urged the incoming Trump administration to continue his tough stance on the CCP, which is rich coming from Biden, who scrapped several of Trump's anti-CCP policies when he became president. However, he did also keep some of those policies, so I guess that's something. Meanwhile, the legacy the CCP is leaving behind, besides the obvious misery to its own people, is apparently uniting Democrats and Republicans on something. So maybe they can work together battling China's monster ship using the most important ship of all, friendship. And did you know that every time you go online, everything you do is potentially compromised? And that's why the people at Surfshark created a VPN that keeps your internet activity private and secure. If you're not taking active steps to protect yourself, everything you do is being tracked and logged by the websites you visit, your internet service provider, and often by your own government. Using a VPN makes you harder to track. Surfshark has servers you can connect to in over 100 countries, more than any other VPN. That includes a server in the British Virgin Islands, where the law allows companies to not log user data. In fact, PC Mag rated Surfshark editor's choice for the best VPN for privacy and security. So check out Surfshark. With just one Surfshark account, you can connect as many devices as you want. It also comes with a 30-day money-back guarantee. So try out Surfshark risk-free. Go to surfshark.com/uncensored to get up to 4 months extra. That's surfshark.com/uncensored. The link is in the description below. And in my ongoing attempt to talk about things YouTube considers too controversial by hiding them in gaming content, check out this episode about Marvel Rivals and what it says about unrelenting hunger and OnlyFans. Once again, I'm Chris Chappell. See you next time.